Hello, and welcome again to the Druids Exchange podcast. With this podcast, we discuss a range of topics from fitness to philosophy, arts, science, and technology, but always with an underlying focus on self improvement, developing a healthy mindset, and all the life lessons that you can learn along the way. And sure, we'll have a bit of crack while we're at it. In this week's episode, we'll talk about literature and writing. So, a very, very simple, but very, very deep and broad topic. So, let's get right into it. So, hello, everybody, and welcome back to this episode of Tuesday Shage podcast. Hello, Mr. Beard. Good evening. How are you getting on?
Good evening, Mr. C. I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Very good. Great, yeah. So today's episode, we take the plunge into the pulp of the infinitely broad topic of literature and writing. So we're going to give a short introduction into the ancient and historic literature, and as always, we're going to circle back around to kind of contemporary works in the form of authors and writers that we enjoy reading across all, so many genres and styles to choose from. So much like a music discussion, there is seemingly no bottom to the barrel when talking about books and novels and literary works. So everybody has their own taste, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, fantasy. So this is what makes the conversation about literature and by association kind of music composition so engaging. So I suppose just kind of start off with the literature. I suppose everybody has some idea and some sense of what literature is. So I thought we just might fire out a couple of dictionary definitions just to because it is quite a, it means something different to different people, to different folks. So so the definitions of the word literature really tend to be circular, which is kind of what we were saying, is kind of it has hidden meanings, it has more complex meanings to some. And so the 11th edition of the Merriam-Webster's dictionary considers literature to be writings having excellence of form or expression and expressing ideas of permanent or universal interest. So the 19th century critic Walter Pater, kind of referring to this dictionary meaning, said that the matter of imaginative or artistic literature as a transcript, not of mere fact, but of fact in its infinitely varied forms. So I suppose it defines imagination, it defines expression, it defines, I suppose, permanent and universal value and interest. And the Dictionary Britannica describes literature as written works, especially those considered of superior or lasting artistic merit. So these definitions assume that the reader already knows what literature is, and indeed its central meaning at least is clear enough. So deriving from the Latin litera, which means a letter of the alphabet, literature is first and foremost humankind's entire body of writing. So initially, the entire body of writing that much like the entire music libraries of the world. Then humankind's entire body of writing. After that, it is the body of writing belonging to a given language or people. And then it is the individual pieces of writing. So it can be broken down from humankind to a particular community of people and their language. And then only then can you actually break it down further into an individual's piece of writing. So it's broad, it's deep. So it's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah. I had, when we were kind of bouncing around ideas over the last couple of weeks for this episode, I wasn't really sure myself what literature actually specifically meant. But the first definition that you gave there, it's like permanent or universal interest. That's a pretty heavy definition. Um, whereas I was kind of thinking literature is just the physical written word, like books and papers and all the rest of it. But yeah, as you then go on to say, like it can be broken down. It's everything, and then it's like a group or society's collection of it, and then it can be like individual pieces of writing. So many different angles to take it from.
Yeah, so I like. I suppose I'll just start by like when we talk about ancient or historical references to literature and writing. Um, Generally, a lot of people's minds are kind of cast back to, the Great Library of Alexandria, which was one of the largest and probably the most significant libraries of in the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria was, but it wasn't the first. Everyone, it was probably the most well documented and well known for its for what it housed and its eventual fate. So there's a long tradition of libraries exist way before that in Greece and the Near East. And so the earliest recorded archive of any written material comes from the Sumerian city-state called Uruk. And this is around 3400 BC. And the Great Library of Alexandria was actually it was during Ptolemy the First's reign, which was 323 to 283 BC. So you're talking about the first libraries and the first archives and repositories of written materials was 3,000 years previous to that. So the Greeks were laying down language, and they were laying down literature and written materials a long time before that. So although the Library of Alexandria held they say somewhere in the region of 40,000 to 400,000 what are known as papyrus scrolls, which were the, I suppose, the paper and the books of the time. So when the actual, it was in 48 BC during Caesar's civil war. It was actually Julius Caesar who actually besieged the city of Alexandria, and he told his soldiers to set fire to the harbor and the port of Alexandria for obvious reasons. You can it was targeting their port. They could take over their ports and harbors, and not only that, but destroy their fleets. And it was in the process of doing this that the fire spread, and it is believed that it's this particular siege and fire that actually that burnt the Library of Alexandria to the ground, destroying most of the scrolls. Now there's it's still kind of there's still debate going back and forth as to how many scrolls were in there, how many scrolls burnt, and how many were actually recovered. But Julius Caesar was the man who ended it, and well, his soldiers to be precise. But it's interesting that there was book repositories and libraries thousands of years before this, which is something that I didn't know, which is interesting to find out.
It pushes the dates back an awful lot, much earlier than I would have kind of thought. You'd think like vast collections of knowledge and books and scrolls written down, kind of recording it and sharing it. I suppose without really thinking about it properly, I'd say, within the last 1,000 years or 2,000 years, maybe a little bit more. But I imagine definitely there's a lot of knowledge that was kind of cutting edge knowledge back at the time of Alexandria, but that's lost now, even if all of it wasn't burnt down. I suppose if you were looking for something more flammable, it'd be hard to find more than paper in that area of the world where everything was probably bone dry as well. So you can imagine the caretakers and the gatekeepers of the library just breaking down in tears, kind of going, my life's work, like the value that's in that library for all of mankind is just lost.
Yeah. There was no so-called kind of monetary value. It was just the knowledge of the ages. And when you talk about, I mean, that is the ultimate treasure. I guess when you talk about human knowledge and and passing down of information and knowledge to the generations.
That's probably the main thing that differentiates us from everything else on the planet, like say humans versus animals, is our ability to communicate. And you can share stories and share knowledge from generation to generation like the Druids would have done way back when, but that was all word of mouth. And there's only so long that the information can stay accurate, and there's only so far that it can travel, really, when it's word of mouth. But when you're writing it down, you can copy it. Like the roll forward a couple of thousand years, and you've got monasteries, and you've got monks just kind of copying works of knowledge and works of art all day long. So the treasure is a good term for it.
Yeah, and when you think about then like the invention of inks and pigments and everything that kind of came with it, when you think of kind of Renaissance artists and kind of in paintings, kind of it all stemmed from and the initial technology of actually figuring out how to put ink to paper. And papyrus itself, it was I suppose it was as close to paper, modern day paper as they can get. But similarly, it was kind of like the pulp of the papyrus plant, just mashed together as we do today. So yeah, it's kind of stemming from that. Would it have been loads of different technologies, new technologies that humankind had not even conceived of until the written word.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of I had an image just there as you were describing the kind of the pulp from the papyrus plant. Back in primary school, when I was probably about 9 or 10, in class we made recycled paper. Now it was a very crude exercise. It was more to kind of introduce the idea of kind of recycling, and when you've used something up, you may find another use for it rather than just chucking it in the bin. But pretty much for that exercise, I think we got paper and just kind of cut it up really small and then soaked it in water. And then I think we added some kind of glue or something and then flattened it out and then just dried it out. So I imagine, it's kind of like thick, kind of pulpy paper. Not very good for writing on, but kind of a fun afternoon in primary school.
Yeah,
I imagine it was something very it was good crack.
Yeah.
I imagine it was something similar with papyrus, because it would have been like a very kind of manual. I can imagine people kind of in big vats of the pulp kind of soaking in some kind of solution or water, like you might kind of break down grapes when you're making wine.
Yeah, of course, this is in Egypt. Alexandria, and so I suppose they may have been using sand, to break down this pulp as well, because I think we said before in an episode that Egyptologists found sand in the bread,
wheat, wasn't it? In bread.
Yeah, but it was actually their teeth being ground down.
That image hasn't left my mind since. just like
Gritty bread.
gummed Egyptians going around eating bread with sand in it. Oh,
These are
yeah,
these were the pharaohs,
yeah. It's
the
kind of
rich
like
folk.
nails on the chalkboard, eating
Yeah,
sand and wearing down your teeth.
oh, stuff.
But there you go.
Um, but yeah, we owe a lot to the Egyptians.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah.
It would be interesting to find out if there was some information in the Library of Alexandria that was lost, like some invention or some way of making concrete, or um, like sewage systems or irrigation or something like that.
How they actually built the pyramids. They might
Or
have had
maybe
the
that, yeah,
they might have had the schematics
yeah.
that went up in flames. Yeah.
Or like something that was there and then was lost when it burnt down, and then took another 1,000 years for someone to kind of discover it again, going, I'm the first person ever
Yeah.
to invent this thing. And those Egyptians rolling in their tombs kind of going, hold on a second, we did that ages ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's the amazing thing. Literally going back thousands of years. So and now
Well,
we're typing on our laptops and
yeah,
digital writing.
that stuff can get lost and deleted much easier than a port going up in flames.
Indeed. So give me some cool facts on literature that you came across.
Facts on literature. I think it'd
Just funny
be
stories.
funny stories. Well, I was writing a book one day. I think it'd be interesting to kind of to bring it forward a little bit, and we can jump back obviously, but to say the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries in Austria, Germany, Central Europe, to Johannes Gutenberg. So before his time, books did exist and scrolls did exist and ink did exist, but it was very much like in the Far East, ink existed and books were created by, you'd basically get whatever you wanted printed on the page, like effectively a stencil, and then you would put ink on it, and then you'd rub a page to basically transfer the ink from the kind of the outline or the stencil, one for a better word, onto the page, and that's how printing happened back then. But to give you an idea of the kind of output or how slow the process was and how manual the process was, any kind of center like printing center, so probably a monastery or similar, would create only up to about 40 pages a day. So it was very much like if you were creating a scroll or creating any kind of book, it would have been a prized possession and probably would have stayed within the palace walls or within the monastery. Like it wouldn't have gone out to the normal folk, wouldn't have been shared around, like definitely wouldn't have been kind of lost or anything like that. It would have been in a case where like only one person can read at a time, kind of thing. You got to sign that book out. So that's kind of how it worked up until before the Renaissance. So up until about 1400s, 1500s. Then Johannes Gutenberg, in the middle of the 1400s, he created famously the printing press. And that's when it kind of kicked literature into overdrive. So he basically invented this big, unwieldy wooden press, probably inspired by a press. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but a press to kind of squeeze juice out of grapes to create wine or to produce wine. There was a few different inventions and a few different kind of evolutions of technology that allowed him to kind of produce or create the printing press. One was ink. So ink was very watery back then. It kind of bled into the page, didn't kind of transfer very well. So improvements in ink was one thing. But the kind of key invention that allowed the printing press to become master invention that we know of it today was basically the individual letters. So if you imagine a typewriter, when you press one of the buttons, it fires up kind of like this is the R key, or this is the S
It's like
key,
a
or the T
hammer
key, or
or
whatever.
whatever.
Yeah, that like tiny letter on the head of the arm that goes up. He invented a way to create those, kind of mass produce those. And then the way the press worked was that he would lay out all the little types. So he'd spell out the letters and all these kind of metallic tiny little pieces, and then he'd put ink on that, and then I think it was a two-man job. They basically pressed down the page, and then that transferred the ink, and it was exactly the same every single time they did it. So going from manually kind of transferring ink the other way, 40 pages a day, with the Gutenberg printing press, you're going up to 1,500 and up to 3,000, maybe even 3,500 pages a day. So like an increase of hundreds of fold. So it really kind of industrialized the production of knowledge, because that's effectively what it did and what it allowed for. So before, you had a book which was a prized possession, and there was like one book in the village, if there was even a book in the village. Now there's hundreds of books in the village, and everybody can have access to the same information. And that's spread through Europe like wildfire. And that allowed for the Renaissance to happen. So new systems of politics, new systems of science, art, sharing knowledge, basically just exploded. It's kind of like when the internet was invented, the ability to kind of share information and to kind of disseminate information. The same kind of thing happened with the printing press. So it allowed us to create books quicker and better. But the big thing that kind of happened in the background was the Renaissance, and was like an explosion. It was nearly like an evolution in knowledge.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, an evolution in invention then, because people had the knowledge, so they could actually go out and and test and replicate. And
exactly, it gave birth directly to the scientific method and to kind of peer review. It's interesting actually. Before the printing press, it's kind of an odd quirk that I came across. The idea of an author, so who wrote a book, that concept didn't really exist before it, because someone would write a book and then someone would copy it by hand and probably change a bit and add in a few drawings, or kind of summarize it and then write their own version and their own version, kind of like Chinese whispers. So even though you might be reading a version of a book, the original author of the original book didn't really matter. But now, because you can mass produce books all the exact same, it kind of gave birth to the concept of an author. So if you were,
cool.
if you were a scientist and you wrote a paper about an invention or discovery, something like that, you were then the author of it, and you could basically replicate it and then share it to all your different scientific peers in the community. And that kind of directly led on to like an explosion in science around that time as well. So Johannes Gutenberg, good man himself.
Where's that? That was Austria, was it?
So that was in Mainz in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he didn't end up a broke man, as sometimes kind of people who invent big things, like they get remembered after the time, but they're actually quite broke in the end. So he ended up, I don't have it noted here, but we'll stick it on the website. He got sued by one of his business partners. There was three of them who, there was two other guys that helped Gutenberg kind of finance the printing press and the offices that he set up and stuff. He ended up getting sued by the main business partner, Andreas Dreitzen. So he kind of lost his fame. Now, he did get a load of grain and a load of tax-free wine, like 2,000 liters of tax-free wine he got in the
Wow.
court settlement.
Score.
Yeah, but his fame, his claim to fame, inventing the printing press, was kind of taken off him. So he didn't end up a broke man, but he ended up like an inventionless man. But it's only hundreds of years later that he's kind of remembered and revered for the gift that he did bring civilization. So yeah, funny one.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. We've mentioned, I've mentioned Victor Schauberger before. So he'd be an Austrian forest caretaker, naturalist, an actual pseudoscientist, I suppose. Pseudoscience has probably taken on a brand new meaning today. But at the time, I suppose this was in the mid 1800s, so it was close enough in time to Gutenberg's invention, and this actually led on to so he was an inventor. Schauberger was an inventor and biomimicry experimenter. So he was, the fact that he was a naturalist and he was a forester. His father was a forester. So kind of Schauberger kind of developed his ideas based on what he observed in nature. And so he's particularly interested in the woods, the forest, and water, and so kind of noticing streams and rivers in the forest. He often kind of referred to them as the vascular system of the planet. So all these streams kind of delivering not only minerals like gold and silver and things, but nutrients from one part of the forest to the other. So this kind of led him into developing his own ideas around what he said that there were kind of the aeronautical and marine engineers had incorrectly designed the propeller. So he was just like, he just by observing things in nature and observing water, he also developed kind of elements of vortex mathematics. So kind of the kind of vorticity in water. I suppose you get these little kind of whirlpools as you have kind of water, was in a rock pool, kind of swirling. So he used to spend hours and hours and days and weeks just observing water and how it behaves in nature. So in as regards the propeller, which he actually went on to invent, he said, as best demonstrated by nature in the case of the aerofoil in the maple seed. Today's propeller is a pressure screw and therefore a braking screw, whose purpose is to allow the heavy maple seed to fall like a parachute, like slowly towards the ground and to be carried away sideways by the wind in the same process. So he says no bird has such a whirling thing on its head, nor a fish on its tail. Only man made use of this natural brake screw for forward propulsion. So as the propeller rotates, so does the resistance rise by the square of the rotational velocity. So this is a guy that's uneducated. He's just kind of observing how things operate in nature and how the maple seed kind of whirls. It's the same with I suppose the sycamore tree and these little parachute propeller seeds, So he's just observing these things, and he actually had the benefit of the printing press at the time. So he was actually able to create diagrams of his vorticity inventions, where he believed that by generating this vortex within a water body or in his inventions, he could actually introduce air and this particular movement that would kind of revitalize the water. So, like in a sense, kind of purify the water, um, as far for the likes of trees, human beings, and any other animal that would drink the water. It would basically heal them. So he had some fairly lofty ideas, but
Mm-hmm.
he was he was known for his crazy ideas, his crazy scientific, like he was a pseudoscientist, but then he was talking in this language. He was talking in this very advanced scientific language. He's talking about rotational velocity, the resistance. The resistance is the square of this velocity as the as so. Um, you refer to the pseudoscientists these days, and they're literally, they're just individuals who, you know, they're scientifically illiterate, basically.
Yeah,
This guy was anything but.
quite the
It's
opposite.
interesting. So he has a fantastic book called Living Water, and it's all about, you can have these, you get these fantastic kind of diagrams of all his inventions, all his vortex inventions, and how he stimulated water, fresh
Mm.
water in the forest, and building log flumes for his father. It's just really, really interesting book. um,
What's the book
and
called again? Sorry,
Living Water.
Living Water. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd say
yeah,
himself and Darwin, because they were around at the same time, weren't they? Very close.
yeah,
So
yeah,
himself and Charles Darwin
yeah,
probably would have had great conversations if they ever bumped into each other in the pub. Because like Charles Darwin was very similar as well. Now he probably had more formal education and kind of a patronage maybe, but he very much just kind of just sat into nature and he let kind of nature reveal the secrets basically. Like
yeah, yeah.
he didn't come at it kind of going, well, I read it in a book, now let me go into the forest and find this thing out in the forest. It's kind of
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
no, I can see the maple seed falling down, and that was his lesson. And he
Hmm.
kind of brought it from there to scientific speak and the square root. And
Yeah.
um yeah.
And then he, yeah, I mean, on the origin of species, wasn't that his book that that catapulted his theory of
Mm-hmm.
evolution into the um
Into
to
the
the masses.
non pseudo science world. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's a cool, like, the idea of and the kind of connotations of pseudoscience these days is totally different. But I think back then it would have been a really interesting time to be around, like if you were interested in that kind of thing, because it's like here, like obviously very intelligent men and women kind of going, right, well, I'm not necessarily a mechanical engineer, but let me just kind of contemplate on this for a few weeks and then kind of come up with something that is considered like probably unscientific or pseudoscience, even though it could be much closer to the truth than someone who might get when they're just in a classroom. Um,
yeah.
he probably benefited from the fact that he was uneducated because it allowed him to kind of think unrestrainedly about those things. Whereas if he was a
That's
mechanical
a really good
engineer,
point, actually. Yeah, yeah,
he might have thought, well, I've read and I've studied that, this is how a propeller works, and we've invented a plane or we've done whatever, so that must be it. And whereas if he didn't have any of that, which it seems he didn't, he's kind of like, well, nature's got it figured out, so
there you go. And it
take a
was a
leaf out of
seed.
that book. Yeah,
It was a seed he observed, and it's like that's a propeller system. Yeah, it's
yeah,
wonderful. But then it's having the ability to actually write it down and to describe it and um,
articulate it. Yeah,
to be able to articulate it and to sketch out your to sketch out your invention, sketch out the, I suppose, the specifications, um, which Schauberger had invented. I think he had 30 to 40, sorry, 300 to 400 patents and inventions by the end of his life. So he was
well,
pretty prolific.
yeah.
Um,
lots of time spent working on his father's log flume. So if he like had a lot of time to work on different patents and come up with different ideas.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
See, that was it. It was actually working on his father's log flume that actually had actually boosted the business.
Mm-hmm.
So as more contracts came in, the wealthier they became. So he could actually spend more time uh,
Focusing
as
on.
an inventor
Mm.
and open up a workshop. And he actually did invent the flying saucer back in the early 90, I think it was 1920, 1930.
Mm-hmm.
He actually had vertical takeoff flying saucer
Okay.
that could actually reach 600 meters uh, vertically straight
Nice.
up.
Kind of like
Um,
the Harrier jet probably took it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
way
pretty.
back in the 20s, like he was
Yeah.
Schauberger was at this, which is kind of cool.
It makes me think of Einstein as well. Like he took a job in a patent office
Yeah,
mainly because it gave him loads of free time,
that's
so he
right.
could actually
Yeah,
work on like his greatest inventions. Do you know, like there's this thing with Einstein, like one of the greatest thinkers of all time, but oh well, he flunked out of school or he failed his maths class and he worked in a patent office and all these things that we try and kind of take away from him nearly. Like, oh, he's this amazing genius, but didn't you know he failed his maths class, or he had like a pretty crummy job working in the patent office? But like, it's because he took the easy job in the patent office, that kind of freed up his mind and freed up his time that he could spend working on this stuff. I imagine
yeah,
Schauberger's contemporaries were probably like, "Oh, sure, you're like a farm boy, or you're like this manual labor worker. What are you talking
yeah.
about? You don't have like a
Exactly.
PhD or whatever else." But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's cool.
Mm.
And so yeah, I mean, there. It appears that there's lots and lots of characters like this throughout history that I suppose they were only able to get their knowledge and their inventions out there once the written word, once the
Mm.
spoken word became the written word. Um, and uh, and I suppose, yeah, you mentioned scientific literature and the peer review process. So I suppose where literary works of fiction, nonfiction, or biography, they depend on the publishing market at the time to kind of determine the success or failure of a book or a novel or whatever the piece of work is in the scientific or academic world of the peer review. It's so your submissions to a journal it is really the marketplace of ideas and the marketplace of for academic research. So I suppose the peer review is designed to assess validity, quality, and originality of your original research articles or publications, and its ultimate purpose is to maintain integrity within that discipline, within the science or um,
Hmm.
whatever it is. So kind of filtering out the poor quality stuff, um,
Do you mean
which is
originality as in you're not just copying someone else's invention type thing, or
yeah. You see,
yeah?
there was I suppose we're much more. It seems like these days we're actually much more kind of lenient, for want of a better word. When it comes to inventions, as long as there's just a little tweak to
Mm.
to a particular technology or an invention, and that can be considered, um, original enough. That it's not exactly the same as this particular technology. So you can actually profit off that, and it is regarded as an original piece of work. Um, so I suppose the peer group is normally those people with kind of similar competency you know in that field or in that discipline, um, and yeah, they kind of evaluate your material. But it kind of seems like in the literary publishing, success relies upon the quality and the originality, but novels and books are really um, it's really down to the marketplace. And so those who buy the book, those who read the book, the likes of me and you, it's a very very different peer group. Um,
Yeah.
and then if the author is lucky enough for that piece of work to be adapted to film or television or something like this would be considered success if you sell 1 million copies or whatever. Whereas in the kind of scientific academic world, it's it's more about how many people in your field, competent people in your field, say that that they agree with your work. They agree that it's actually once it's kind of once it can be replicated time and time and time again, that it is considered a hypothesis changes to a theory, and then you're published. Then you actually get published, and then you're considered a winner.
Yeah.
So I suppose there's when you talk about peer review, it's definitely done within the, I suppose, literature critics as well. Critics are critics in theater or any in any of the kind of creative works. There's always somebody trying to get a pound of flesh. Yeah.
There are definitely two ends of the spectrum. I've got two examples of it. One, you made me think of do you know WhatsApp, the app on your phone, the messaging service.
Mm-hmm.
That was so in terms of like originality, when you were saying, do you know, it can be just a tiny tweak and it's now considered like a brand new invention or a brand new product or something, whereas before it needed to be like from the ground up, this changes everything kind of thing. So WhatsApp back in the day was just another messaging app that transferred data through the internet, like 1,000 other clones and like similar apps at the time did. They all did it pretty much the same. WhatsApp wasn't exceedingly popular, but they added a tiny new feature to it, and that's when. So, for anybody who uses WhatsApp, when you send a message, it's got that little tick. So it'll have one tick when it sends from your phone, and then it'll have another tick when it delivers to the recipient's phone, and then the two ticks will turn blue when it's been read. And it was at that point when that was introduced that WhatsApp popularity just went through the roof. So like it was the same type of messaging service as all the other types that aren't successful, and it was just this tiny tweak that kind of just brought it up to the next level. And I think Facebook now owns WhatsApp. They bought it for a couple of billion or something. So
yeah, there are two there's two lads, two co-founders. So I think within a year after this, as you say, once they started gaining users, and I think another feature then that followed was to use the your phone's contact list, so you can basically just everybody in your phone book, that uses it, you can automatically transfer the numbers from your phone book directly into WhatsApp. So, and then that was it. After that, it was game on, and the boys just, I think they got 6 or 7 billion each at Facebook, and they're like, "Thank you." I wonder, is that overvaluation? But they got it anyway. So,
well, that's the thing with so. That's a funny way that you put it, because overvaluation, it's like, well, where does the value be determined? Like the market in like a product or a service these days, the value is determined by the market. So it's me and you saying, I'm going to use WhatsApp, and it's a billion other people saying, I'm going to use WhatsApp, even though technically, like from a coding perspective or like a very black and white perspective, it mightn't be any more valuable than another messaging service that does the same thing. So it's kind of the market that decides it. bringing it back to literature, and the second example is if you've heard of the author Dan Brown, American author. He's probably most famous for writing the Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons, probably about 20 years ago, nearly 25 years ago. I don't know if you've read any of his books or if you come across them.
I have indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember you telling a story this in one of the very, very early episodes.
Yeah.
About reading his books by the swimming pool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those things that sticks out in your life where it's like, it was kind of like a zeitgeist thing. But so Dan Brown he was a teacher, and he was, probably not paid very well as a teacher in the States 20, 30 years ago. And he went on holidays, I think, to Tahiti. He read a fiction book, and he's like, I'm going to be a fiction author. So he quit being a teacher in 96. And then in 1998, he published his first book called Digital Fortress. He then, a couple of years later, went on to write and get published Angels and Demons and Deception Point, 2000, 2001. They weren't particularly successful. I think they printed like 10,000 copies each. He wasn't really a well-known author. But then his fourth novel, The Da Vinci Code, became like a phenomenon, like an absolute bestseller. And at that point, people kind of went, "Oh, that was a pretty good book. I wonder has he got anything else?" So then they went back and they figured out that he had 3 other books which weren't really successful or well known at all, and now they're all bestsellers. They're all like extremely popular. The collectively, his collection of books now has sold like 81 million copies. So even though the books came out and they didn't change, it was just a timing thing. So it's the market decided that they weren't valuable at that point, but then when everybody kind of copped on to the Da Vinci Code, it's like, oh, this is class. Then it was like, it's like the other books then became more valuable as a result. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, with like peer review and with like scientific journals and all the rest of it, like if you get your work published, the value is there, very much black and white. Like science and fact, they're true today as much as they were true back whenever.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely the market decides these days what value to place on it, whether it's a valuation of billions for WhatsApp or 81 million bestseller Dan Brown. He's got a good formula for the books. So for anybody who hasn't come across them, generally the books they involve kind of a mix of historical fact with some fiction kind of blended in. A lot of his books will have kind of religious themes in them, but they're not kind of preachy books, if you know what I mean. But usually the books will kind of cover a span of maybe 24 hours, and it's kind of like solve a puzzle or like a high speed kind of chase or something. It was interesting checking out his inspiration for his books and like where he got the ideas, because a lot of his characters and kind of scenarios that he goes through in the books and kind of plot lines, they're taken from actual holidays that he went. Like his first book was based in Seville, where he moved, like he lived for a time. But like the I suppose underlying theme of all of his books are kind of like puzzles, or kind of like following secrets to the root, that kind of thing. I read that when he was young, so there was always kind of like in his house when he was a young kid with his brother and sister, there was a lot of kind of ciphers and puzzles and things that to figure out. So for example, on Christmas, he didn't find the presents that he got from his parents under the Christmas tree. His dad basically set up a treasure hunt that they'd wake up in the morning, they'd get a clue, and then they'd go find another clue. And sometimes the clues left the house and like they'd end up in town. and like his presence would be in a park or something.
That's fantastic.
So like his blood is like treasure hunts and like crossword puzzles and
That's
secrets and
brilliant.
stuff. So
Yeah. So the inspiration really and his imagination, creativity came from his father. Really, it was kind of, or it was
yeah,
kind of seeded in that way. Yeah.
seeded there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been so over the last number of years, I've mainly been reading kind of non-fiction books. Um, but as I was kind of taking down a few notes for this episode, I was kind of getting into Dan Brown and his kind of history and his backstory. And it's like, I must, because he's a couple of books that I haven't read, his more
Yeah.
recent ones. So it's like, oh, I must get back and read a couple of fictions because they're like, you can't put them down when you start.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, even like, I just have a few listed here, and I know you've read 1984. These are some of the classics. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, A Man's Search for Meaning, which we've talked about on this podcast before. So these are kind of, I suppose, Brave New World in 1984. They could considered fiction, but they were almost kind of prophetic, in some way. Now, some people will, it's a very interesting debate as to which one of these we're kind of starting to kind of enter into. Yeah, or both. But like interestingly, like when you talk about, I suppose we're talking about value, and we're talking, the value of literature, the value of books, and I don't know, have you ever read any Dostoevsky, Russian philosopher, novelist?
But he's not at the top of my list to read, but he's on the list. I imagine it's not easy reading, kind of heavy themes and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, but incredibly deep. I mean, so he's a journalist. He was a novelist, philosopher, short story writer. But a lot of what he wrote about was kind of, I suppose he grew up in kind of troubled political, Russia, between, in the early 1800s. So, in one sense as well, his kind of writings and his essays were quite prophetic in what he was actually. He wrote a lot about kind of religious themes and social and political, spiritual atmospheres of Russia at the time. So some of his famous works like would be Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons. But I love this quote of his. He's like, one of his most notable quotes is, "A man is a mystery. It needs to be unraveled. And if you spend your whole life unraveling it, and don't say that you've wasted time. I'm studying that mystery because I want to be a human being."
Nice.
It's his writing and his philosophy and his books and short stories. It is absolutely littered with these incredible insights and just a wonderful way of writing. Of course, this is translated from Russian, but
I imagine he was wonderful. I imagine he was a man that liked to go down the rabbit hole from time to time.
Yeah. Oh yes.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah, I wouldn't expect that kind of reaction. I wonder where that's from. And then just dive deep into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd recommend. I'm sure.
Crime and Punishment is his most famous one, isn't it?
Yeah. But then he has so many short stories and just essays on various philosophies and I suppose, yeah. I mean, they're all kind of religious and social kind of human kind of human psychology, social issues at the time, but very, very detailed and very, very like the characters that he writes are just so real. When you're when you're reading them. you can almost kind of say, actually, somebody I know is exactly like that. Like you can relate to it so easily. Um, and and then he's incredibly deep,
Makes me
incredibly
think
deep
of
thinker.
Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Mm.
So a situation so incredibly removed from the easy life that we have, but the lessons he learned in the Nazi concentration camps, they're so universal that you can literally drop them into any society or any culture, change them into any language, and they're as true for
Yeah,
me or you or whoever as they were for him um, back 70 years ago or so. So
yeah,
Dostoevsky sounds similar, and that's like the lessons he learned when he was kind of diving into what it means to be a human being. I imagine
yeah.
they'd be quite universal.
Indeed, and that's it. When you think about somebody who was like the likes of Viktor Frankl, but even like we talked about before, mindset. That book that's literally written about um, kind of fixed versus the growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Um, 30 years, like a lot of these maybe popular science books, I suppose, similar to books like Cosmos by Carl Sagan and on the origin of species would be considered a popular science book as well. And the kind of
Mm-hmm.
language it's written in, like the author's entire life's work could be 30, 40 years condensed into a few hundred pages um, for our reading pleasure. And this is the huge, the huge value in reading,
Mm-hmm.
the huge value in literature. And interestingly, I don't know, you probably knew that Bob Dylan was actually he got the Nobel Prize for literature a few
Bob
years ago.
Dylan.
Bob Dylan, yeah,
Yeah.
and he actually, like, initially he actually he refused to accept it. He was like, I'm not a literary
I'm not an author.
um
Yeah.
he didn't actually consider himself a writer or a literary what do you call it, a literary figure. He was like, I'm a
Yeah.
musician, I'm a songwriter, um but like that was just the kind of humble nature of Bob Dylan. He was like, I don't want to accept this. I
Yeah.
think there's $1 million in prize money as well. He
It's a
didn't,
million.
he
Yeah.
didn't need any money. He's like, I
Yeah.
don't need that. I don't need this. But eventually he reluctantly accepted the accolade and was like, okay, I don't actually want the money. I think he said give that to a charity, and he named a few charities.
Yeah.
But yeah, he won that. So the Nobel Prize literature also transcends music as well. Poetry writing, playwrights. Um,
Yeah.
there's it's such as I mentioned at the top. It's almost an infinitely broad topic. Um, from scientific literature, poetry, prose, novelists. Um,
Mm.
yeah, the list goes on.
And you can get, like, say, going down the fiction route. Like, one thing that I kept kind of coming back to when going through notes and kind of doing a bit of research the last couple of weeks is like the idea of a book kind of transporting you either to a different time or different reality or different kind of universe, or like in transport you into someone's mind to kind of go through the inventions and discoveries that they've come up with, like, as you say, their life's work, 30-40 years condensed into one book.
Yeah,
That's the magic of a book. It's like you can get transported back then. But also if you take like fiction, so if you want something light and you don't necessarily want to study when you're trying to chill out, if you just want to be entertained, you could take something like Harry Potter. Um,
boom.
often,
Harry Potter, one of my
Harry
favorites.
Potter, often seen as kind of like a kid's book, and I suppose technically it
I
is.
disagree
it's
completely.
it's a book that kids read,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I
that's
suppose you could
yeah,
draw that connection to it. But
yeah.
what a fantastic collection of books, or like a book series.
Wow. See,
Absolutely.
I think this is like fiction. Fiction gives you the opportunity to engage your imagination rather than your intellect. It seems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like to transport to like an entirely, I say like a different universe, not as in like not our universe, but someone else's universe, but like it's kind of like our world, but it's slightly different because there's wizards and witches that live in it. And like I think Harry Potter, it's definitely got themes that are universal, and I think that's why so many people can connect to the book
yeah.
and kind of connect to the series and the kind of underlying. I don't want to call them lessons, but the whole idea of kind of like being an outsider, good versus evil, kind of society shunning someone away, and that kind of thing. They are,
Courage, integrity.
yeah, they're like things that
Yeah,
most people can kind of latch onto.
yeah,
Um, and like as you say, like crime and punishment, the characters are so real. You might think, do you know, that reminds me of John or Mary that I used to know or something. But Harry Potter is the same. Like you'll see bits of your friends and maybe bits of your school teachers and bits of your boss
yeah.
and bits of like people you like and don't like in the different characters. And the books, to be fair to them, they're just so entertaining and so enjoyable to read,
So magical.
so magical. But as you say, like a book can allow your imagination to run wild. Um, Before the movies came out and before the kind of illustrated versions of the books came out, you just had black and white text on a book, and the book might have been 300 pages long or 500 pages long, but it's your mind that kind of brings it to life.
Yeah,
And if you think so, I assume both of us have read all the Harry Potter books and watched all the Harry Potter movies.
correct.
They did a brilliant job of the movies, kind of translating the stories of the books into movies. But I think when I think back of kind of bits of the books or bits of the movies, like funny incidences or conversations or Quidditch matches or
Yeah,
duels or whatever else, it's like I'm visualizing what I imagined rather than what I watched in the movies.
yeah.
Um,
I found
and that,
myself doing that too. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It was
just
just
goes to show
so
how
much
relevant.
more, so much more. Well, yeah, there you go. Like the descriptive nature of J.K. Rowling's writing was
Mm-hmm.
was uh, was on another level. And of
Yeah,
course, like we talked about Schauberger and Einstein having their their workshops.
mm-hmm.
J.K. Rowling wrote a lot of Harry Potter on the train,
Mm-hmm.
going back in from London City out to where she was living. Um, so all of her inspiration was kind of it was almost like kind of stream of consciousness that she was downloading it
Yeah,
from wherever from herself. She was just on the train. That was a nice kind of um, a quiet kind of working space she found, which is
mm,
interesting. So um, she had that space, she had that head space and that kind of physical space. Um, and of course that's where the whole Hogwarts Express
yeah.
kind of
The
whole
cornerstone of
thing
the
came.
whole story really is the train journey to the start of school year,
Yeah,
and then like every book and movie pretty much ends up with the kind of right, the story for this year is over, back on the train.
yeah,
um I think that taking a train journey is a, I suppose flying is similar in that you get on and you don't have to think about anything, you don't have to figure out where you're going, you don't have to kind of look at the time or anything. It's just you get on the
yeah,
train and you can just switch off,
yeah,
which I
yeah,
imagine would have been perfect for her to kind of go like, right, I don't need to think about where I'm going in London or how my day was when I was working or what I'm going to put on for dinner or anything like that. It's just like I'm going to transport myself to this imagined world that I'm creating right now.
yeah.
Um,
Wonderfully.
yeah.
Um, and I think she approached 30 publishers when she with her
Mm,
first book with what was it, the Chamber of Secrets, and yeah, they all said no, 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 no. And
That's a
then
kid's
one,
book.
yeah, it's a kid's book, and it was a one independent publisher then decided to give her a go. All those 30 publishers now, they're
kicking
kicking
themselves.
them.
You asked me at the top of the episode for some interesting literature facts. I've got a couple on Harry Potter.
Excellent.
So I suppose these figures might be a little bit out of date, but they're no less impressive. So as of February 2018, the series of books have sold more than 500 million copies worldwide, making them the best-selling book series in history. They've been translated into more than 80 different languages. You mentioned the first book, Philosopher's Stone. That sold in excess of 120 million copies. So it's one of the best-selling books in all of history. Library of Alexandria included, I imagine. The final book in the series, Deathly Hallows, became the fastest-selling book in history. So you say that the independent publisher back on day one kind of took her on board, and like they're glad that they did. The Harry Potter brand is now worth an estimated $25 billion. So you can imagine those other
really?
$25 billion.
I know JK herself is worth, she's a multi-billionaire now because of the movies and everything. Yeah. I mean, it's like, to go from zero, she was on welfare, wasn't she, with her daughter, to multi-billionaire.
Yeah.
Within,
so
within a decade or whatever.
It's something like those 30 publishers, they're like, nah, I'd love to find out the reasons that they gave for not signing her. Like, was it like, I don't find it interesting, or I gave it to my daughter and she didn't like it, so no kid's going to like it, or the market isn't ready, the market's not going to put value on kids' books. I don't know. But she must have been thinking in the back of her mind, I'll show you. Just you wait. Just you wait.
Exactly. And I've 6 more books in the in the pipeline.
In the bank, yeah. And then for it to kind of go like, right, this is meeting number 31. I really hope this one goes to plan. I know it's an independent publisher and they probably don't have like the clout of like a big publishing house, but I know my books are worth it.
Yeah.
Kept going. The rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, that's it. You just need one lucky break, it seems, and you know, for somebody to believe in you. Another great success story is the Game of Thrones book series, George R. Martin. I mean, out of nowhere, completely out of left field. So this man, I suppose, he was a science fiction writer and a novelist for 20 odd years. Never really, you know, he produced lots of sci-fi novels, and I think he was making a decent living for himself. But he always, I suppose, I think he was writing what is a Song of Ice and Fire, which is actually what the collection of books were, the series of books. I think he'd been writing them for maybe 20 years. So a very, very different kind of a story. He read lots of J.R. Tolkien, in particular, Lord of the Rings. He was absolutely fascinated with the universe that Tolkien had produced. The characters, the magic and the fantasy of it all, and the fact that Martin, he was a fantasy and a sci-fi writer anyway to begin with, but he had a huge interest in, or what he actually says himself, and some major influences of his were the what was it, the Wars of the Roses. So basically historical wars and historical conflicts throughout I suppose the last few hundred years. So, of course, a Song of Ice and Fire was adapted by HBO. It became the television series Game of Thrones. So these novels were, as I say, they were influenced by Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, and the saga that he'd produced. So he wanted to create a similar fantasy universe, but grounded in historical warfare. And War of the Roses, he had like a deep fascination with human conflict, but also kind of questions around loyalty, pride, human sexuality. We see a lot of that in the see a lot of that in the books, and indeed HBO. They pulled out all the stops when it came to no, when it came to the sexuality and the nudity part, piety, and the kind of the morality of violence, which frequently kind of arose in the books, and which is something that HBO really portrayed really well as well. They didn't shy away from the violence, the human sexuality, war, and conflict. So always very much grounded in very human human psychology and human activities, but with that element of fantasy and sci-fi when he brought in the Prince and Dragons and and I suppose magic, the children of the forest, and all this kind of the kind of magical angle that he brought into it. So he was kind of I would say he was struggling in the same way that J.K. Rowling was, but he was out of nowhere. His book series just exploded, and I think I remember when he was. He wanted, because Lord of the Rings became 3 movies, and just blew up in popularity. He initially wanted to do the same thing with Song of Ice and Fire, but then he realized very quickly that he was going to have 7 books, and which is kind of what J.K. Rowling did with Harry Potter. He was thinking that he actually wanted he would have to make 1 movie for every book that he wrote, because he wanted to actually give 3 hours, in the same way that Lord of the Rings had given 3 hours per movie to one particular book. The universe was that.
Dense,
was that expansive and that dense that that's the only way he wanted to do it. So it was 7 movies. It's a big contract. But then this is when HBO approached him and said that we don't think that Game of Thrones is movie worthy, and we think we should actually do a TV series, and we'll give each book 1 season, 8 hours. So he's like, 8 hours per book is like that's way better than 3 hours per book. So he's like, okay, TV, and he could see that the golden age of TV things were going that direction. So so he went from a little author to an absolute billionaire in the same way as J.K. Rowling. But those books and the TV show, they're fantastic, absolutely world class.
I haven't read any of his books, but definitely a fan of the TV show.
Yeah,
and they did a really good job of it. From what I
understand. The thing is with the books, his style of the books is that he would choose a character, and then 1 chapter would be from the perspective of that character, and then he would and then the next chapter would be somebody else. So it might be Tyrion or Sansa. Pick a character, and and one chapter would just be telling their story, and then you chop and change. So the first book actually was quite difficult to get used to his style of writing. That you'd be jumping from character to character, rather than having a kind of a full plot, a full storyline, and all the characters interacting. But once you get used to his style of writing, books, it's just phenomenal. Because he does end up creating close to 2,000 characters over the course of all the books that he's written. Still has to finish 2.
Yeah.
We're waiting, George.
Yeah. Somebody give him a call there.
Yeah. So yeah, like, as you say, like fantasy and nonfiction is, I think, like anything, like music, or I suppose me included, as you mentioned, we're kind of going through a phase of nonfiction reading, kind of educational stuff, and like I mentioned before, I'm kind of reading a cool book on the hidden life of trees, which is like, yeah, trees are just fantastic. I didn't realize they were so cool. But yeah, you go through these phases of nonfiction, fiction, educational, biographies. Yeah, it's just wonderful to have access to the minds and the knowledge of so many.
Yeah, all throughout history as well. Not just your contemporaries, but yeah, take somebody from a few hundred years ago, or musings from someone a couple of thousand years ago. You can just pick up the book and you can kind of see what they were seeing. Yeah, it's good. Kind of a healthy balance as well, because I was kind of, not that I was getting kind of burnt out by the kind of the nonfiction and the kind of educational books, but just because I wasn't really kind of rushing back into, I must keep reading that. But I think maybe a little bit of fiction or something. Maybe I might pick up Dan Brown's most recent one. Kind of get the claws in you and you'll fly through it.
Yeah. Also, something that we were talking about before we came on the air, favorite books as a child, but even plays. And you were telling me that you recently read a wonderful Irish play.
Yeah. I had heard of it. So Philadelphia, Here I Come. I think it's a book that's taught in Leaving Cert, English, or Junior Cert, or so in school anyway. So
I wonder. I don't think I told you. Maybe I did that. I actually performed this play in college.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, the Drama Society. Yeah.
Which character?
I was. Did you have you mentioned the play yet?
Yeah, Philadelphia.
You did. Okay.
Yeah.
I was Gar Private.
Private, nice.
So I was the alter ego.
Yeah.
I was on stage from start to finish.
Excellent. It's a good part to play in that. In that play. It's one that I'd heard of. I didn't read it in school, or I wasn't assigned it in school to study it, but I always kind of put it in that bracket of, well, that's like Shakespeare, or that's a book that you have to read, or it's a play that you have to read.
Yeah.
But you mentioned it to me a couple of weeks back, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. It's pretty short. I can kind of squeeze it in between 2 educational books. And like, I think it's 80 pages long or something. It's very, very quick to read, but it's brilliant. I really enjoyed it. So play, there's probably a max of 6 characters, 4 main characters.
Something
father,
like that,
father, son, alter ego of the son, and then
Madge, the
what'd you call her?
She'd be the maid, I suppose, or the
maid. Yeah.
She wouldn't be she'd be the lady of the house, but not the wife of the.
Yeah,
the wife
exactly.
Of,
good way to describe her.
Yeah.
But I'm actually going to keep my eyes out for when it'll be performed as a theater piece, to go see it
Absolutely.
somewhere. I think
Yeah.
that'd be pretty cool.
I
But
will totally join you on that, because I haven't actually seen it performed, just from a stage eye view.
yeah,
I haven't actually seen
you
anybody
had the
else.
opposite perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it would be good to
Uh,
see that. Yeah, it's wonderful. So yeah, the premise.
yeah. So it's like very similar to Dan Brown. It's kind of set over the course of 12 hours or 24 hours, and it's just kind of one occasion. So it's Gar, the son in the story. He's moving off to Philadelphia, kind of moving in with his aunt and uncle-in-law, I think. Um, so it's the night before he leaves and the morning of it. So kind of, I suppose the main theme is his relationship with his dad, which is fairly cold, which um, I wouldn't say was the norm in kind of old Ireland, but like fathers were seen as kind of closed off and kind of wouldn't reveal their emotions, and communication lines between men was never particularly good. So I
Yeah,
think the kind of central theme is around that, and
yeah. It was
um,
relationships, wasn't it? Really,
mm,
and and then Gar Private then would have been his alter ego, as you say. Kind of all of the things, all the things that Gar Public, who's referred to in the
mm,
play or in the script. And so this is the Gareth, and the character that everybody interacts with. Gar Private is all of his private thoughts. So
mm,
so all the things he's thinking about saying,
yeah,
but never actually says. And Gar Private is, he's the funny one. He's
yeah,
he's always cracking jokes and slagging off the other characters. And when the priest comes in,
yeah,
he's making fun of everybody. Basically, it's a really funny play, but it's also
mm,
very, it can be somber at
important as well.
times, it can be
Yeah,
sad at times, but yeah, very, very well
yeah.
written.
Um, I definitely recommend it. I wouldn't always recommend a play to somebody, but this was like it's you'll laugh to yourself as you read it, and it's like 80 pages, so you can read it in a couple of short sittings. Like it's
Yeah,
a no non-commitment. Like you don't need to kind of, all right, well, I'm reading this book for the next 3 weeks. It's like a couple
yeah,
of nights, and you'll have it done, and
yeah.
it's really good.
And as
Um,
you say, like straight away, the first thing that pops into your head then is, I have to see this performed,
yeah.
when all the theaters come back online. And yeah, yeah. And of course, it's, there are wonderful Irish theaters, that they put this on quite frequently, every couple of years.
Hmm.
Up in the Abbey Theatre and Gate Theatre. And I don't know if Drew would ever done it, but um, yeah, it's been, Brian Friel is the author, isn't it? Yeah, or the
Hmm.
playwright.
The old famous Shanachie, Eamon Kelly, he played. I think he played the dad in the original production when it was first. Would you call it released or
Yeah,
performed? Yeah. Um, so yeah, good Irish theaters and good Irish theater actors, all involved in it. So yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing that in the flesh.
very good.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I've just, yeah, you put the question to me before, is like, what, I suppose, favorite books as a kid, and I could really only think of one author, which was Roald Dahl.
Yeah,
Um,
classic.
but then I read all of his 16 books.
Hmm.
The Twits, the Witches, Fantastic Mr. Fox, James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, all absolute
Classic.
classic stories.
Hmm.
And I think they were all adapted into movies as well, weren't they?
Hmm. Yeah.
Angelica Houston was the big bad witch in The Witches. I remember that movie like it scared the bejesus out of me as a child.
I was just about to say, I was in primary school and I was at a friend's birthday party and we watched The Witches during the party and I was like, that is freaking the hell out of me. As a young child, like I'm not going to go home. I'm not going to shower for a month because the clean smell off me, they'll only find me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, talk about imagination and talk about um, how Roald Dahl was able to, yeah, his descriptive writing and how he's like, um, yeah, it was second to none. Like you talk about J.K. Rowling with um, Harry Potter, it wasn't really children's writing. It wasn't written specifically, as you say, for children. It was it was very sophisticated language, very sophisticated writing. Whereas I remember Roald Dahl, it was very childish, and but but uh, but it was the fact that it was so descriptive, and he was so good at um he was so good at bringing emotions to the surface. You know, whether that was fear or laughter or whatever it was that he was trying to, like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. Even you can taste the chocolate. You can taste the river of chocolate. It was like, yeah. James and the Giant Peach, this massive peach. It was like, oh, the textures and the smells and everything. He was fantastic at that.
That's I'm gonna start a new list of books that I'm gonna read my son, and in time, sons. Roald Dahl is probably going to be right at the top. Yeah,
excellent.
Yeah, such classic books from, I guess, anybody who's read them as a child, from everybody's childhood. Yeah, I haven't thought of Roald Dahl's books specifically in a long time, but yeah, every single one of them, all classics, all brilliant.
The Twits, remember the Twits? Yeah. There's a little description of a cornflake that had been stuck in his beard for for probably weeks.
Yeah.
Just little things like that, like it gets you. It gets you as a child.
And stick with you like 30 years later.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Nice. I think Roald Dahl is probably a good spot to end our episode on literature. What do you think?
Absolutely for this episode, and I think like so many, it has to be revisited.
Yeah,
because I mean we've kind of touched on what literature is, what it means to some people. We've kind of touched on a few of our favorite authors and stuff, but I think there's much more to delve into.
We're just scratching the surface. Yeah. Definitely. Okay, well, that's it for another week, folks. Thanks for joining us once again on Druids Exchange. We hope you found it interesting. If you did, why not check out the website druidsexchange.com, where we'll post more information on the different topics and books and authors and maybe historical events that we discussed this evening. Join us next time when we're going to have an episode on music, covering everything from Irish diddly-eye to punk rock to superclubs in Ibiza and all the notes in between. But for now, take it handy. We'll catch you in the next one. Slán.
Slán, good night, guys.